Right. So today we are going to be talking about deductive reasoning. We'll first introduce different types of reasoning, and then we'll look at some rules around deductive reasoning. So the three types of reasoning we'll be looking at briefly: deductive, inductive, and then abductive. So let's see what each of these are before we get into talking about deductive reasoning. So inductive reasoning, where we take individual cases and we add those up to come to one general conclusion. Okay, so you'll have to just imagine this, but in my in-class section of this, I'll usually bring in like a cup full of either Legos or paper clips or something and demonstrate this. So imagine that I have a cup, and that in that cup are a bunch of paper clips. Now, if I randomly select 5 paper clips out, and they all are green, we might draw the conclusion that it's highly probable that most or all of the paper clips in the cup are green. How do we determine that? Well, we determine that by just looking at specific examples of paper clips coming from the cup. Each of those is green, and so we draw that conclusion that it's highly probable that most or all of the paper clips in the cup are green. So what do we know then about inductive reasoning? That we can never get a certain conclusion from inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning, we begin with certain premises, right? And then we arrive at certain conclusions. So if I say, for example, all of the paper clips in the cup are green, and I take one out without showing it to you, and I say, the paper clip in my hand came from the cup, I can draw the conclusion then that the paper clip in my hand is green, right? So that would be deductive reasoning, because we start with we start with the premises that all of the paper clips are green, right? And that the paper clip in my hand is from the cup. And we, from that, draw the conclusion that the paper clip in my hand is green. Now, abductive reasoning is a little bit different. So let's take a look at this one. All paper clips in the cup are green. Here's a green paper clip. Therefore, the paper clip is from the cup. Now, again, we can't be certain of that, right? That conclusion is not certain in the way we get from deductive reasoning. But what is it? It's basically what we call the best possible conclusion, right? That we sort of look at a scenario, look at a situation, and then we draw this conclusion based on that. And what we're sort of drawing on is just the reality, right? So it's not inductive reasoning in the normal way. We're not taking a bunch of incidents and then piling them together. Rather, we're looking at it in something of a deductive way, but then we're drawing a conclusion that cannot be held certainly, but is probable. So those are our 3 forms of arguments. Now, the rest of the semester, the session, the class, we're going to be looking at inductive and deductive reasoning. Here's an example of these different types of arguments, right? All swans are white, Daisy is a swan, therefore Daisy is white. Inductive, Daisy is a swan and white, Danny is a swan and white, Dante is a swan and white, therefore all swans are white. Right? For abductive, all swans are white and Daisy is white. Therefore, Daisy is a swan. Right? Clearly, we can't draw that conclusion certainly, right? But perhaps we can say, hey, if Daisy is a white creature and all swans are white, it's an okay chance that Daisy is a swan. The only way to be certain of that is if we said that swans and only swans are white. So here's a way of dividing arguments into two different types, one deductive and one inductive. And we evaluate these in different ways. So let's take a look at inductive first. So our arguments, we can say, are either strong or weak, right? So the sun will rise tomorrow. That's probably a strong conclusion, right? A weak one might be that I've only seen two swans in my life, and I noticed they're white, and then I conclude that all swans must be white. That likely doesn't follow, because I've only looked at two swans. It may be true in the end, right? It doesn't mean it's not true, but it doesn't follow in a way that gives us any confidence in the conclusion. Deductive arguments, however, are evaluated in a totally different way, right? Deductive arguments, first of all, are either valid or invalid. What do we mean by that? Well, the deductive argument is valid, right, when the conclusion follows from the premises. If it doesn't follow from the premises, then it's not a valid argument. Okay, so valid arguments are either sound or unsound. And what do we mean by that? Well, we mean that all premises are true, but sound, all premises are true. And it's a valid argument, right? And so that's sound or unsound. Therefore, any invalid arguments are also going to be unsound. So if it's invalid, or if the premises are not true, or both of those, it's not going to be a sound argument. Just some examples. So deductive arguments, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Right? Therefore, we draw the conclusion that Socrates is mortal. We get a certain conclusion when the argument is valid, right? So our conclusion, what I mean by that is it's certain that if those premises are true, the conclusion is going to be true. With a deductive argument, if its premises are true and it's a valid argument, if we add new premises to that, it doesn't make it any stronger than before, right? Because that certainty is already there. The conclusion is contained within the premises, right? No new information arises. And they're evaluated according to validity and soundness, not according to strength. Inductive arguments, on the other hand, are going to be the types of arguments where we gather information and then draw a conclusion from it. So here's example one. All the people I have known have not lived beyond the age of 130. Or all the people I know or have heard of not live beyond the age of 130. Therefore, humans must be mortal, right? So where do I get that from? I get that from the fact that everyone in history has died, and the people who are living now are not living beyond the age of 130, right? And so from that, I can draw the conclusion that humans must be mortal. Example two, I saw Socrates last week, and he appears to be bipedal and speak somewhat intelligently. He also still has some hair. All the mammals I have known have had at least some hair. I'm not aware of any non-mammals with hair, but I could be wrong. I learned in anthropology that humans are the only bipedal mammals left. So I'm pretty sure that Socrates is a human being, right? I gather all that evidence together, and I come to the conclusion that Socrates is a human being, right? Again, that's just high probability. It doesn't mean that we have certainty there. In this case, if we add more premises, right, our argument is going to be stronger and stronger. So let's focus now on deductive arguments. So we're looking at a couple of things. First of all, we're going to look at the truth of statements. Are the statements true or false? Then we're going to look at the validity of the argument. We're going to bring these two things together and then determine whether or not the argument is sound. So some truth examples. It is morally wrong to inflict unnecessary pain on other beings. But this one's interesting because this one may be hard to determine whether or not it is true or false because it's a moral statement. And it depends on your view of morality whether or not you can say say that a statement about morality is true or false. Some animals feel pain, right? That's a question of truth or falsity. I take it that that's true. Therefore, it is morally wrong to inflict unnecessary pain on some animals. So our conclusion there follows from the premises. So if you buy the first two premises, then that conclusion is going to be true. So what about validity? So validity, again, is when the conclusion follows from the premises. So here's an example of a valid argument. All bananas are citrus fruit. Some bananas are yellow. Therefore, some citrus fruit are yellow. So if we look at the statements here and see what's true and what's false. So the first premise here, all bananas are citrus fruit, we should know that that's false. We should also know that the second one is true, that at least some bananas are yellow. Now the conclusion, does it follow from those? Some citrus fruit are yellow. No, it doesn't, right? So we can still have a true conclusion and our argument be unsound, right? But it is a valid argument nonetheless, right? Because that conclusion follows from the premises. Okay, what about an invalid one? If a cat is a tabby, it is named Henry. Or another way of putting this, all tabbies are Henrys. My cat is named Henry, right? So Jamal's cat is a Henry. Therefore, Jamal's cat is a tabby. Now, at first you might say, well, yeah, that seems to follow, right? Because all tabbies are Henrys, and Jamal's cat is named Henry. Now, why isn't that true? Or why isn't that follow from it? Now, what do we know when we say all tabbies are Henrys? All tabbies are Henrys. What we're saying is that if you are a tabby cat, your name is Henry. Right? What are we not saying? Right? What we are not saying is that if your name is Henry, you must be a tabby cat. Right? So it doesn't work in both directions. And that's also a false statement. Now notice the second two, my cat is named Henry, is true. And my cat is a tabby, that's also true, right? So we still get a true conclusion right? But it's an invalid argument because it doesn't follow. So here's an informal rule. So what you want to do to try to sort of test it is if you think of some example that it runs counter to, right? A counter example to what the conclusion says, but still keep the premises true. Now, what about soundness? Remember, soundness requires two things: both that the argument is valid and that all premises are true, right? Two things: the argument is valid and all premises are true. For the first here, all human beings must die. Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates must die. Now, if we agree, which I think we can probably agree that all human beings must die, that is their mortal. And Socrates is a human being, right? We can probably agree to that. Therefore, Socrates must die, or Socrates is mortal. So if those are true, so let's just assume that they're true, those premises, we have a sound argument because it's both valid, right? The conclusion follows from the premises, and the premises are true. So another example: birds are non-human animals. Some birds talk. Therefore, some non-human animals talk. Now I say presumably true because you might say, well, birds don't truly talk, they just mimic or something. But I'm going to take their sort of speaking as talking here. So birds are non-human animals. That's true. Some birds talk. Well, you all have probably heard some parrots or some other similar kind of animal talk, right? So those are true. The conclusion, some non-human animals talk. Well, that follows from those premises, right? And so we get a sound argument. And here's an example of an unsound argument. Cats are all purple. Lorenzo is a cat. Therefore, Lorenzo is purple. Remember, we have two things: one, valid; two, all the premises are true. Is this a valid argument? Well, the conclusion follows from the premises. What about the truth of the premises? Cats are all purple. That one, not so true, right? Lorenzo is a cat, that's true. Lorenzo is purple, that's false. So we have an unsound argument, but it's unsound not because it's invalid, but because premises are not all true. Final thing, we have two different types of arguments we're going to be talking about, deductive arguments. The first are categorical, right? So things like, here I say snow is white, right? So I have a subject, I have a copula, which is the is, and I have white, which is the predicate. All trees with cones are conifers, right? We have subject, all trees with cones. We have the copula are, and we have predicate, which is conifers. Some trees with cones lose their leaves or needles in the fall. I don't know why I had that last statement, I'm sorry. Anyway, these are categorical statements, right? One is all, right? And so our universe is completely filled of trees with cones, right? That's the entire grouping. Some, right, is particular, right? It doesn't give us any sort of truth or understanding of all, right, of something. It just says the sum of them are. And so when we have some there, our conclusion, you'll notice, can never be all. We can't get all if we have some as one of our and one of our premises. Some conifers, oh, I'm sorry, that should have been a conclusion. Some conifers lose their needles. All right, conditional arguments, they're a little bit different. They use an if-then structure. So they look like this, right? If you study, then you will do well on the exam. You studied, therefore you'll do well on the exam, right? The structure then is if then. Then if you can affirm the first part of the statement, then you get the second part of the statement. Okay, so those are two different types of deductive arguments that we'll be looking at. So that's our discussion on arguments.